What a time to be alive. For so long, if you wanted to paint Warhammer 40k, you were stuck with one scale, and that's a big problem. But now, new epic scale is on the way. But why do different scales even matter? Well, for one, painting different scales is fun. And secondly, I've found that working with different scales can make me a better painter. I'm going to paint 3 different scales of Space Marine. I wanted to take a break from Blood Angels for a change, so today we're going to paint Games Workshop's poster boys, the Ultramarines. Each scale had its own challenges, and we're going to run through those as we go, but also summarise them at the end. Let's get into it. I went into this video knowing I preferred larger scales, knowing I hated weathering, and knowing that epic scale just wasn't for me. Will that still be the same at the end of the video? Well, let's find out. Oh my goodness. These are so small! Even at this scale, there's no escape to clean up. So I'm using all the same steps as normal, just smaller. So this bay clippers and some sanding pads and just really working away to remove all the mold lines. Then I'm clipping them onto these handy little bulldog clips so I can actually hold the things in place. Tell me you're getting old without telling me you're getting old. A quick black prime and then we're ready to do our workup. These are 2 thin coats, Marine, Elysium and Celestial Blue. It started out quite well with an all-over blue base coat, but then it started to go downhill. Now, I don't want to seem like I'm complaining a lot, but by this point, my back is hurting because I'm bent over trying to watch things and keep my head out of camera. Sorry about the hair, by the way. My eyes are straining, my hands won't stop shaking, and I'm just all over hating this painting process. It isn't looking too bad, unless you're looking really closely, in which case it's looking atrocious, but good grief, this is a miserable, miserable process. We are definitely firmly into what's known as the ugly phase here, and the whole thing's looking a bit too desaturated and more like a space wolf, but I've got a plan for that. What we're going to do is we're going to take some Talosar blue contrast paint and just wash it all over, which will bring back the saturation into that blue. And actually, I take it back, it's not looking too bad at all, and I'm reasonably pleased now, so shut up, former James, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm going to paint some eyes. Why not? Who doesn't love a bit of eye painting on something you can barely see? I will say the really great thing about minis this size is you don't really have to be too careful about the details, because to be quite frank, you can't see them anyway from a mile away. In for a penny, in for a pound, and we'll just paint on some yellow edge highlights. This is to represent the gold armour trim. If you zoom in, you can see these aren't that tiny, but you can't see them anyway. When I finished these, the first thought was, my god, I'm never going to do this again. But now looking back, actually, 5 Marines took me an hour. I really like the 5 of them on their base, and I'm hoping that with the new, slightly larger scale, more detailed sculpts from Games Workshop that the future is looking bright for epic. Time for the big one. This is a 195mm McFarland Marine. This is the scale of Marine that I really feel most hobbyists are missing out on. The steps are simple enough. Prime it black, then apply a violet shade into all the recesses and all the lower parts of the armour. Then spray a transparent ultramarine over the top of everything. Next I assembled it, and honestly, this is the reason I hate sub-assemblies, because as soon as I assembled it, I took off lots of the primer I'd already put on. Now, this is my bad, but still, it's what I find frustrating. Still, it's a simple thing to touch up, and that's what I then did. Then it was just a simple case of spraying a white zenithal over all the raised upward-facing volumes, so that when I went over with the next layer of ultramarine, they looked a little bit brighter. Once I'd finished this step, I actually slapped a layer of matte varnish over the top just to remove the gloss. I didn't capture that on camera, sorry. Scale 75 Metal and Alchemy range is an incredible range of metallics that I definitely recommend picking up. There's a real range of hues, which make it really easy to do true metallic metals that really pop. Links are down below. If you're not very experienced with true metallic metals, it's actually pretty simple. That's why I like it. Essentially, apply a dark metallic as a base layer, and then, working up in progressively lighter and lighter tones, just highlight it as you would do any other model. That's it. Neat, right? If you don't have lots of different shades of metallics, you can always just use your normal paints to lighten them up. Here I've just added white paint to my normal metallic just to make it a little lighter. This is Cassandra Yellow, and it's one of my favourite hacks for getting lovely, rich gold. But if you're ever unsure about testing a paint, try it on the back first, or at least somewhere that won't be seen very obviously. As you can see, there's nothing fancy going on here, literally just applying a thin wash all over the top, and just to bring out the lustre of that gorgeous gold Aquila. Well, it's not actually Aquila, is it? I'm not quite sure what's going on here, but maybe someone can tell me down in the comments below. I love painting eyes at larger scales. Yes, I'm going to give these the traditional red lenses, and so to make them pop a little bit more, I'm painting them white first. Once I've let them dry, I give them a quick coat of fleshed Harrah's red, giving them that deep, menacing glaze. Then, some highlights with Bal red contrast paint. Nice! Now let's zoom right in for a specular highlight. Boop! I picked out the lights in his arm console in striking scorpion green, and then added a subtle glow around the edge just to make them pop a little bit more. Edge highlighting works how you'd expect. Using the side of your brush, simply work along the ridges and pick out all the surfaces that are facing upwards. I use 3 stages, each progressively lighter, with the brightest points being the ones closest to the light source. Edge highlighting is usually an absolutely savage task, but this was a lot of fun. So much so, you can have a sped up version of the rest of it. You're welcome. Honestly, at this point I was having way too much fun, so maybe I got a little cocky and decided to do some freehand, something I am notoriously bad at. Using reference images, I marked out the rough shape of the logo. Then, using some thinned white paint, I sketched out the rough shape of it and then filled it in. And you know what? It's not perfect, but I am pretty proud of myself. It looks quite good. Nice! Just goes to show, sometimes you just need to try things. To build up the courage to do this, I simply told myself that it's just paint, I can always repaint it. In the end, I needed 4 coats of this white to get a decent coverage, but it was worth it, and you can see it in the glamour shots at the end of the video. I repeated the same steps with his shoulder pad, but this time it was just a simple arrow. That was a bit easier to achieve. Again, I'm feeling pretty proud of myself here. Looking back on it now though, I probably should have just masked this one out as it's a simple shape to cut out, but hey, live and learn. I really don't like weathering. It's not that I don't like the effect, I think it looks great. I'm just really not confident doing it. But this video is all about pushing yourself to try something different and learn something new, and I am really glad I did, because this is just a little bit of torn off kitchen sponge, which I've dipped in black paint, and then I spent a bit of time practicing on another bit of paper to see what it looked like, and then dabbed off the excess and worked all over the model, and it looked great. I made the next step a little bit lighter and went over the same spots again. I don't know what I was afraid of, honestly. I guess I was sort of worried that I would cover up all the amazing paintwork I've done so far, but if anything it made it slightly more realistic and better to look at. So when I added the weathering powder as the final touch, it really just brought the whole thing back together, and like I say, I had so much fun painting this model. I was a big fan of large scales right from the beginning, but this really takes the biscuit. Why don't we play 40k in this scale? And now, using the power of editing wizardry, let's assemble a 32mm Primaris Space Marine. Honestly, I don't know how this happened. I guess I was overconfident with the last few steps, so I decided to exactly repeat them as I had done on the larger marine, but on the smaller marine, using golden high flow acrylics, a product I've used hundreds of times, with a zenithal prime, which I've done hundreds of times before, and yet I ended up with this as a result. I have no idea what's gone on here. I've even asked Monument Hobbies, but honestly, this one's likely on me. The salient point is, this is fucked. To cover up the beading, I covered up the details too. Yuck. Back to the drawing board. And now, using the power of editing wizardry, let's assemble a 32mm Primaris Space Marine.
Déjà vu.
Only insane people repeat the same steps twice, so we're going to change it up. And we're going to use Ultra Acryl for a matte finish, and we're going to make sure we thin the paint down properly this time before we add it into our airbrush, and then essentially repeat the same colour steps. So violet into the shadows, and then an ultramarine over the top. A zenithal to pick out that volumes, and then ultramarine over the top again. And there you go. Other than the finish, the one on the left hand side has a lot more detail. Now it's back to edge highlighting, so get the good brushes out, and here we go. I've been testing these two thin coats now for a couple of weeks, and honestly, the short version is I really like them. No doubt I'll get a full review out at some point, but the TLDR is, if you find some, you're not going to go too far wrong by buying some. The edge highlighting here follows the same steps as we did before, essentially just picking out the raised edges of all the armour panels, anything that would be catching the light. Then, working our way up brighter and brighter, covering a smaller and smaller surface, until we're done. Annoyingly, there are people in the world who can paint eye lenses without making any mistakes. I am not one of those people, however. And so, when I inevitably get red in a place I don't want to get it, by the fact that I can just go back and tidy up later. Simply grab some of the ultramarine blue and go back over the edges. The same goes for the edge highlighting actually, you can just tidy up any of those armour panels and neaten them all up a little bit later on. The next stages are all just about refinement, so we pick out details in other colours. I need to add some contrast to make the model pop a little bit. To do that in a more visually interesting way, I'm going to use violet. I'm going to use violet because it tends to just lift the model and add a little bit more colour in there. Just makes it more exciting to look at. I could just use black, but the problem with black is it'll desaturate everything, which isn't the vibe I want to go for. I want a bright, rich, intense blue colour, and I'll achieve that more readily if I use violet. Carrying on with that very dark violet colour, I'm now recess shading all the various bits and pieces, which just adds a little bit of separation between the armour panels and just makes the whole thing pop. By now you recognise these three colours. Non-metallic metal just feels a little bit out of reach for me, or at least good non-metallic does, so I'm leaning back on true metallic metal, and honestly I'm absolutely loving the way this looks. It's so simple, literally just work up the raised or upward facing areas of the armour with that metallic paint and work your way up to the brightest highlights. Ending with Moonstone Alchemy with a bit of added white for the very brightest points. For the final metal coat, it's Vallejo metal colour Duraluminium. Like most metallics, it's super opaque, but it goes on so smoothly too. Honestly, this stuff's an absolute wonder. If you want to change the colour, you can always add inks to it, but in this case, I kept it straight up silver. In order to really lean into the effect though, I did add a little bit of black pin washing into all the little crevices, just to help bring out the detail. And to finish off, I used one of these fancy laser cut agave plants from Gamer's Grass. So now I have 3 scales of Warhammer miniatures painted. From 6mm epic scale, 32mm 40k, all the way up to a 195mm McFarland Marine. And what did I learn? Well, the answer's pretty easy. Aside from it's good to try new things, I learned I'm very excited to try the new epic scale, but that when you're painting really tiny things, it's important to simplify everything right down. Lots of contrast made by large jumps of value is what you're chasing here. If you've never tried painting larger scales before, I cannot recommend enough that you try it. Lots of the jobs that may be more chore-like on smaller scales, like eye lenses, are a lot more fun. Edge highlighting is a dream, and you can also go to town adding lots more little details and effects and having lots more room to play than you would ordinarily have. But for me, I think the biggest learning curve is I just find volumes easier to understand when they're a little bit bigger, and then I can apply those volumes to smaller scales. So when I finally did reach that 32mm scale, I was able to apply lessons directly to that model and be more effective as a result. With a bit more patience and care, I was able to apply all the lessons from the larger model directly to the 32mm, and as a result, by doing this scale last, I think I achieved a better result. I really hope you've enjoyed the video, so I'm just going to give a quick wrap up and remind you to like, subscribe if you've enjoyed the video, and join me over on my free Discord if that's something you'd like to do. Until next time.